Soldat was the lowest enlisted rank, a basic soldier with no leadership role, drafted at 18. Depending on the branch, they were called Schütze, Grenadier, Pionier, or similar. Their main role was frontline combat, mainly cannon fodder, but they also secured occupied areas, guarded prisoners, supported logistics, and maintained weapons and vehicles. You were expected to follow orders without question and be the workhorse, digging, carrying, building, and endless marches for days. All soldiers swore unconditional obedience to Adolf Hitler as Supreme Commander, ready to give their lives. Proof of Aryan ancestry was required. You got 15 Reichsmark per month, less than a factory worker. At least food, housing, transport, and bullets were free. After 1 year, later 6 months, those not yet promoted could advance to the sub-rank Obersoldat for above average performance. Your excitement of blitzkrieg victories in the West quickly vanished once you arrived at the Eastern Front. Freezing temperatures down to minus 30 degrees or lower, lice-infested uniforms, and chronic hunger. Entire companies were wiped out in days. Many froze to death. Soldiers labeled as cowards or defeatists were sentenced to death. You had no choice and no control over your fate. You could only pray your superiors knew what they were doing. Gefreiter was roughly equivalent to an acting corporal. More experienced and reliable, they often had specialist roles such as radio operator, scout, or sniper, and served as the second machine gunner, handling ammunition and supporting the main gunner. As a Gefreiter, you took responsibility in small groups but couldn't command. At least now, you were exempt from basic duties like guard shifts, and knew that 80% of the replacement soldiers wouldn't survive the Eastern Front. But you didn't ask questions about what happened to the prisoners you guarded. Gefreite were equipped with a Karabiner 98K and earned a whopping 22 Reichsmark. If you performed well under fire, after 6 months, you could be promoted to Obergefreiter, handling tasks like driving, ammo supply, or quartermaster, and gaining more status in your unit. The highest enlisted level of Stabsgefreiter was rarely awarded, because most who survived long enough advanced directly to the next rank. Unteroffizier was the first true leadership rank, equivalent to a sergeant, responsible for leading a squad of 10 to 15 soldiers. He trained and disciplined his men, acted as the link between soldiers and officers, and ensured orders from above were carried out directly in battle. But as the war accelerated on the Eastern Front, as an Unteroffizier, you quickly commanded units of 50 soldiers, since officers died left and right. You trained wave after wave of new conscripts, younger, weaker, and far less prepared than the soldiers of 1941. Most were fed straight into the meat grinder by high command. But you simply followed orders, scraped together whatever rations were left, and watched your unit shrink day after day. When ordered to execute a deserter, you didn't hesitate. Thousands of German soldiers would end up like that during the war. Feldwebel, equivalent to a technical sergeant, formed the backbone of the infantry. They led larger specialist groups of 30 to 50 men and commanded lower ranks. They handled all day-to-day stuff: training, discipline, tactics, supply, and internal order. In cavalry, artillery, and flak units, the rank was called Wachtmeister. As Feldwebel, you were highly respected and led from the front, leading rifle, machine gun, or mortar teams. You were a weapons and equipment expert, carrying your trusted MP40, often conducting tactical blasts of strategic targets. The highest level, Stabsfeldwebel, was a highly experienced soldier with strong technical and tactical skills. At least now you earned 54 Reichsmark per month, but most Feldwebel wouldn't make it to the next rank. Those who survived long enough were often automatically promoted, since the officers were dying like flies. Leutnant was the first officer rank, equivalent to a second lieutenant. Before 1943, this rank required higher education, but by then, promotion was based only on ideological loyalty and willingness to die for the Reich. So many lieutenants were in their early 20s, often fresh from officer school. They commanded a platoon of 50 men, or a 5-vehicle tank platoon, directly at the front. The lieutenant only focused on combat leadership, making tactical decisions, choosing positions, positions and routes, maintaining morale and holding the unit together under fire. As Leutnant, you also learn to read maps and write reports that make battlefield blunders sound like strategic retreats. But Leutnants also led patrols and assessed enemy positions, often exposing themselves more than enlisted men. Their role and visibility made them primary targets, leading to very high casualty rates. If you didn't get smoked by Soviet machine gun fire, their snipers got you. But High Command just sent the next guy to fill your uniform. The Hauptmann, equivalent to a captain, commanded a company of 100 to 200 men with full responsibility for combat leadership, organization, logistics, pay and discipline. They planned and coordinated operations, decided how platoons were deployed, integrated support weapons like machine guns and mortars, and set defensive positions, attack plans and objectives while reporting to battalion command. They made independent tactical decisions and were fully accountable for success or failure. As the highest ranking officer, most soldiers directly knew. They shared living conditions with their men to build loyalty. The emotional weight of sending men to die was your dark companion. Pressure from above too. As Hauptmann, you had to directly witness heavy casualties and constant replacements in your company. Many company commanders experienced the rapid early victories, smashing through Vilnius and Minsk with Army Group Center, only for High Command to push onward to Moscow, despite collapsing supply lines, harsh Soviet resistance and freezing weather. By the time Stalingrad was over in 1943, most experienced company commanders in hard-hit units like the 6th Army had been killed, wounded or captured. The Eastern Front ultimately claimed the lives of over 4 million German soldiers. The Major was a key field officer rank commanding a battalion of about 1,000 men or 80 tanks. They issued operational orders to Hauptmann commanders, oversaw order execution and advised higher command while controlling deployment, reserves and flanking movements within larger operations. They had more autonomy and staff support than a Hauptmann, focusing on planning and coordination rather than direct frontline command. But Hitler's no retreat order remained iron law. In big battles like the Normandy landings, as a major, you worked from command posts using field phones and runners. When communications broke down under heavy naval bombardment and air attacks, you had to act independently. Your orders were simple: throw the Allies back into the sea and hold positions at all costs. Within hours, your battalion collapsed. With heavy losses, weak Hitler Youth reinforcements and no air support. By August 1944, you were ordering what remained of your men to retreat east across the Seine. You realized the war was lost, but still needed to obey. The Oberstleutnant, equivalent to a lieutenant colonel, could command up to 2 battalions of 2,000 men, or serve as a regimental second-in-command. He coordinated multiple companies across wider fronts, balancing combat decisions with logistics and timing. You now had more freedom than a major to adjust plans based on actual battlefield conditions. At this level, battles either held together or collapsed entirely. But with limited communication and constant chaos, you often had to commit exhausted or weakened units to hold the front line. Responsibility for failure was absolute. The lives of thousands of men depended on you, yet you were still bound to follow orders from above, even when they made no tactical sense. The Oberst was equivalent to a colonel and the highest field officer rank, commanding a regiment of up to 4,000 men or battalions with 240 tanks. He had full responsibility for leadership, training, supply and personal decisions across a whole battlefield sector. An Oberst directed operations on a wide front, coordinating infantry, artillery, anti-tank units, engineers and tanks. He managed the timing of attacks, movement under enemy fire, and defensive structures between multiple battalions. So things got more complicated, but as an Oberst, you had a full staff team, operations, intelligence, logistics, signals, to support decision-making. In battles like Stalingrad, Oberste often led fragmented units, trying to hold collapsing lines, deciding where to commit final reserves or abandon positions. Losses were severe, with entire regiments destroyed, captured or encircled. Your decisions affected large formations at once, with constant pressure to meet higher command objectives, even when delusional, where failure could mean the collapse of an entire sector or your dismissal. The Generalmajor, equivalent to a brigadier general and the lowest general rank, commanded a division of up to 20,000 men on paper, often far fewer in reality. At this level, a Generalmajor led formations capable of independent operations, directing multiple regiments across large areas, shifting forces as battles developed, and managing massive logistics. As a Generalmajor, you rarely saw combat, but still faced constant threats from airstrikes and artillery. You also depended heavily on reports that were delayed, incomplete, or inaccurate. As conditions worsened, you often lost control as units broke apart, struggled to coordinate counterattacks without air support, and were always blocked by higher command when trying to retreat or redeploy. Many Generalmajore were killed, wounded, or captured along with their divisions, under strict oversight from Hitler, who removed commanders he didn't like. The Generalleutnant, equivalent to a major general, commanded up to 2 divisions with 40,000 men, or sometimes a corps-sized force of 50,000. Usually experienced former frontline commanders, they led critical units, directing extended operations rather than single battles. They coordinated multiple regiments with heavier support like artillery and assault guns, relying on staff for planning, intelligence, and logistics. While they had more freedom in interpreting orders, they still operated under strict control from Hitler and risked dismissal, or worse, if they doubted him. With incomplete information, they made high-stakes decisions affecting tens of thousands, often with no good options. You're in charge, but the situation is spiraling. In operations like Bagration, you faced rapid Soviet breakthroughs, encirclements, and the collapse of entire formations, struggling to withdraw units against overwhelming enemy forces. The General, equivalent to a lieutenant general, commanded a corps of up to 70,000 men and often led a specific branch such as infantry, artillery, armor, or mountain troops. They needed to interpret orders from army group or high command and adapt them to local conditions while overseeing subordinate generals, staff officers, and multiple divisions across hundreds of kilometers. As General, you made strategic decisions on breakthroughs, encirclements, and pursuits, relying on subordinate commanders to execute operations. You finally enjoyed a proper headquarters, staff car, and decent meals. But the growing paranoia and fear of Hitler's unpredictable wrath kept you up at night. You also heard about Stauffenberg's bomb attempt in July 1944, but you said nothing. You kept signing orders and filling gaps with more men. Toward the war's end, the regime increasingly favored Waffen-SS and what they called loyal generals, while the Wehrmacht was starved of resources and personnel. You thought that was weird, but kept your mouth shut. By Hitler's command, fanatical Waffen-SS defense drove massive losses. By late 1944, roughly half of all 5.3 million Wehrmacht deaths occurred in the final 9 months. The Generaloberst was equivalent to a full 4-star general and the second highest rank in the Wehrmacht. He commanded multiple corps totaling 150,000 men, often leading entire panzer armies or even army groups. At this level, decisions shaped entire fronts and long-term strategy. As a Generaloberst, you operated at a scale where wars were decided, directing massive operations, working directly with high command, and translating Hitler's wishes into reality. You had enormous staff support and real influence, yet independence was an illusion. Every decision came with intense political pressure, and crossing Hitler could end your career or your life in an instant. You had godlike power on paper, but were surrounded by paranoia, betrayal fears, and the knowledge that all was falling apart. But you kept playing along, sometimes even as a personal advisor for Hitler himself, and continued signing orders that sent hundreds of thousands to their demise. At least you enjoyed the highest privileges the crumbling Reich could offer: luxurious headquarters, personal aids, and relative safety far from the front lines. Some Generaloberste helped enforce brutal regime policies, including the Kommissar Order and the internal purges after the July 1944 plot. Others were tasked to rebuild shattered panzer forces with a collapsing war economy. The higher you rose, the more isolated and trapped you felt. Generalfeldmarschall was the highest rank in the Wehrmacht, awarded personally by Hitler himself. Field marshals were extremely rare. There were only 19 in the Heer during the war. As Generalfeldmarschall, you commanded entire army groups of 500,000 men, directing massive offensives, retreats, and encirclements across entire theaters of war. At this pinnacle, you translated Hitler's directives into operations, so you were even closer to the Führer, whether you liked it or not. You were far away from the mud and blood, held a fancy baton, and earned some nice cash. But you were trapped in a collapsing empire. You couldn't just retire or escape. Defeatism meant death. The realization that you're just a tool for Hitler's delusions hit you in the face. Every decision came loaded with intense political pressure. You were constantly watched, constantly judged. Paranoia was your companion. Some field marshals ended up enforcing or tolerating the regime's worst policies. But in the end, they got you. Some field marshals took their own lives as the Reich collapsed. Some were forced to do that. Others were captured when Germany surrendered in May 1945. At the Nuremberg trials, the lucky ones received short prison sentences. The less fortunate, like Keitel, were hanged for war crimes. The once mighty Wehrmacht lay in ruins. Millions were dead. Cities reduced to dust.